Hello. How are you doing? Yes. So happy to be with the helpers today. I work with people from all walks of life, but I love working with the helpers because that's my background. I used to work with people with addictions, people who experienced homelessness, and people who had mental health issues. So today I'm going to touch upon some of my stories and some of my learnings about that part of my life. So for 14 years, right after I got out of university studying in psychoeducation, I worked at what is now the CIUS du Centre-Sud. So we talked about CIUS. It wasn't called like that. It wasn't that name because it's a long time ago, but now it's the CIUS du Centre-Sud. And so for 14 years, I worked with people who had special needs, exactly like you do. And after 14 years, I decided to redirect my career as a speaker, and I've been doing this for about 11 years now. So if you're good at math, 14 years as a counselor, 11 years as a keynote speaker, yes, I started at 8 years old. Just so we get the math right. Time flies, doesn't it? Time flies when you're doing work that is important to you. And so today, notice that I sneaked in a word to the initial title of the conference. When I was working on this conference, I've been preparing this for a couple of months, and something struck me is that empathy, of course, is so important to the work that you do every day. But self-empathy and self-compassion is also so important. And when I work with the helpers, that is sometimes something that helpers lack. They're really hard on themselves sometimes. So, and that was my experience, and I'll share a little bit of that with you. So let's start with the what and the how of empathy, because empathy is a very large concept, right? And it can mean many things to many people. And just before we start, let me tell you that I'm first and foremost a workshop facilitator. So I'm going to get you guys to interact with me. Is that okay with you? Yes. Too late to back out now.
Oh, man.
I got you. So I'm gonna ask you questions, and I'm gonna ask you to, answer back and have this. I know you guys are active people, so let's get this interactive. 3 types of empathy. What's the first type of empathy? Starting with a bang, right? Affective empathy or emotional empathy, which is where you feel what the person is feeling, right? Second type of empathy is someone venturing? Excuse me? Natural empathy. Was that what you said? Natural? Yes, right. Natural empathy, which can, I think, be linked to affective empathy. The second one that can be natural is cognitive empathy, right? The one where, and we also call it perspective taking, the one where you understand where the person is coming from. You understand their world. It's much more about the rational ability to put yourself in the person's shoes. And the third type of empathy, yay! Active, yeah, I tend to get excited. Active or compassionate empathy, which is where, and we also call that empathic concern, which is where you're driven to act to help someone, to do something to help them. You all have all 3 types of empathy. And my learning in the last 25 years has been that sometimes we are higher At certain moments in our life, we are higher, and with different people, we're higher in one of these three types of empathy. So I just thought that we would, set the record on what researchers agree are the different types of empathy. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay, moving rapidly along. So we need all of this in order to do our work and to help people. I found something very interesting. This researcher called Helen Reese, she wrote a book called The Empathy Effect, and she uses a nifty acronym to break down how we can demonstrate empathy to someone. And I found that really, really interesting. I use this with my children at home to help them be empathic. I use this with my clients. Some of my clients are managers and they want to be more empathic in their day-to-day lives. And so I use this acronym. So the E of empathy is eye contact. Such an important part of empathy, right? What happens when you look at someone? You connect, exactly, and you see what they're going through. One of my clients said, "Kathryn, you worked with the homeless before. I have a question for you. How can we, when we cross people who are homeless on the street, when we see them, how can we help them? What do we need to do?" And say hi? Yes. The first thing I said was, look at them. All of my homeless clients said one thing. They said, what is especially painful is when people don't look at us. When they walk right by like we're not there, like we don't exist. Eye contact is so powerful in demonstrating empathy. And when I said that to this person, she said, yeah, but Kathryn, that's really uncomfortable. Looking at someone who's in such a place of suffering, looking at them in the eye. And I said, yeah, it's really uncomfortable. It's also really brave. So, eye contact. What do you think the M in empathy stands for? Any ideas? Mindfulness. We'll touch upon mindfulness later on. For Helen Reese, it's looking at the muscles of facial expression. When you're in the presence of someone, of course their words are important, but their facial expressions will give you loads of information on what they're feeling and what they're going through. The P is, yeah, you got it. Posture will give us so much information, again, on what is happening within the person. The A is for affect, and this we will talk about a little bit more later on. Affect is the emotional tone of the interaction, and affect is twofold, because it is what the person is displaying as far as the emotional tonality, but it's also what you are feeling in an interaction. And that is so key to maintaining empathy. We'll talk about that a little bit more. T, tone of voice. Right? You've heard this. We can say the same phrase with a different tone of voice, and it has a totally different meaning. Like, he's so great. And he's so great. Two different meanings. Tone of voice is a key factor in empathy. H is for hearing the whole person, which means going above and beyond the words. The words are important, but very, very often there's another meaning. There's something between the lines. And the Y is your response. Seeing all of these elements, how do you respond? How do you respond to the person, but how do you respond internally to what is happening? So I wanted to share this model with you because I think this is really like a checklist. I use it all the time to say, am I missing something in this interaction? Do I have everything I need to be able to demonstrate that I am really there for the person, that I'm really being empathic? So I hope it's valuable for you. Next, we go into emotional regulation. If we want to be empathic, we absolutely need to regulate our own emotions. And that's the self part in empathy. I love this quote. Does anyone know Susan David? She writes about this concept that is emotional agility. It is very, very linked to being in the helping profession and to lasting and to avoiding burnout and to making sure that we're in the right place to do what we need to do. And she says this wonderful thing. She says, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. Would you agree? So whenever we're doing something meaningful and something courageous, there will be discomfort. Discomfort, often in the form of the emotions that we will experience when we're in certain types of interactions. My whole career has taught me that to remain empathic towards others, we absolutely need to be empathic towards ourselves. If we're not doing that, eventually we might be depleted. We might feel that we're burning out. We might feel exhausted, and that's not a good place to be. So I wanted to talk about this concept of emotional agility that helps us remain empathic. And again, it's Susan David is the author that coined this concept of emotional agility. So the first part of this concept is showing up. Showing up to our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors with kindness and curiosity. With the same kindness and curiosity that we would give to someone that we are helping. The second element or step of emotional agility is stepping out, which means, and I know you are very, very, a big group has been interested in the mindfulness workshop today, but this is very close to the concept of mindfulness, which is stepping out and detaching from our thoughts and our behaviors and seeing them for what they are, just thoughts, just behaviors. And mindfulness helps us get there. Have you ever had that moment where you totally identify with an emotion? Have you ever had that moment where you're really frustrated? The third part, the third step when we're talking about emotional agility is about values. It's about walking your why, and it's about taking a step back. Sometimes when we react to a situation, it's because the situation is going against one of our strongly held values, right? I facilitate a workshop on dealing with difficult personalities, and it's one of my favorite workshops. And people will often say, well, Kathryn, why is it that some people react adversely to narcissistic people, and some other people, it doesn't bother them? And one of the I think the keys here is values. When a behavior goes against our value, we react to it. So if one of your values is humility or teamwork, then maybe narcissistic behaviors will really get to you. And it's so important to know that, right? It's so important to identify, oh, I'm reacting here because it's going against one of my values. Making sense? Yes? And we're going to look at values. And then the fourth step of emotional agility is when you move on and you make little steps toward where you want to go. Having done the three first steps, it's how is there something you need to change? Is there something we need to address? Is there a difficult conversation we need to have? Is there a boundary that we need to trace? Moving on. Emotional regulation is about recognizing someone else's experience and recognizing our own and making the difference between the two. And it calls on so many skills. Self-awareness, the ability to distinguish your emotions and the other person's emotions, we said that already, and the ability to regulate our emotions. And the tricky part is on the spot while it's happening. That's the tough part, right? When we're in an interaction and we feel an emotion coming on and we need to manage it while it's happening. That's a skill that I think takes a lifetime to build. I mean, I give workshops on it and I'm still working on it. And I'm far from being perfect at it. It's still hard. Sometimes it's much easier after the fact, right? When you have an interaction, you have an emotion, you do the best you can, and then at night, you say, I should have said this. Or, I shouldn't have said that. And I think it happens to all of us. We are all learning. So emotional regulation is a bit like using a thermostat to bring down the temperature. When we feel anger, how are we going to bring that down? I'm going to share something that research says works really, really well to do that. Empathy is an emotional skill. It's also a cognitive skill, but it's an emotional skill. And empathy teaches us that each emotion is there for a reason. I can't stress that enough. No emotion exists in vain. There's always something to be learned about the emotions that we experience. And they contain gifts and important learnings, and there are no unnecessary emotions. When you know why emotions arise, then you can really work with them in the best possible way. Now, please look at this grid. This is probably the tool that I work with the most when I am working in the workshops and with my clients in coaching. It's an emotions grid based on the workings of Julia West. And it's the tool that helps the most with emotional regulation. Psychologists say that in order to remain empathic in the long run, we need to be able to label our emotions, ideally as they're happening. And yes, you can take a picture of this, and if you want to receive this, I might send it to Laura so that you could all, would you like that? Yes. Oh, that was a nice yes. Like it. Okay, perfect. What strikes you when you look at this grid? There are 100 emotions here. You've experienced all of these emotions. Do you think you've labeled them all when you were experiencing them? No, of course not. Me neither. The thing that happens is that when we notice the intensity level. What I love about this grid is the intensity level. What we know, research tells us, this is very, very clear in research, is that when we're in the high intensity, emotions tend to dictate our actions. If you can use this grid for yourself, for your clients, with the people you work with, and learn to get comfortable with the different emotions that you experience on a day-to-day basis, it's emotional regulation in action. Now, I wish I would have had this grid earlier on in my career. I think it would have helped me tremendously. Sometimes people say, well, Kathryn, that's too bad because there are 4 negative emotions for just 1 positive. Maybe you thought of that too, right? I see one person saying, well, not necessarily. Sadness, anger, fear, and shame, again, psychologists say, are not negative per se. They all have a function, and they all have something to teach us. However, they are uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable. And if we work with this and we learn to name it, what happens is when we name the emotion, when we label it, it goes away more quickly. And so that's wonderful. So I will send you this. Then there's the values piece. To remain empathic in the long run, we have to be clear about our values and when an interaction is more difficult because it's going against one of our values, as we mentioned earlier. And so again, I have a list of values here that if you wish, I can send. And so that we're clear on what are my non-negotiable values and what are the situations in which my values are, they're being sort of threatened. So I will send you this also. Emotions, our emotions and other people's emotions can be a door to more empathy, or they can be a wall. We can hit a wall if emotional regulation is more difficult, or if we deny or occult certain emotions that we experience. Here's where I tell you a story. A story about when I was starting as a counselor, working with people with addictions, working in a center called le Centre d'accueil Préfontaine, which was on Rachel Street in Montreal. It was a center that was a detox center for people who had issues of homelessness, for men who had issues of homelessness, addiction, and often mental health problems. And so I was 21, still finishing my bachelor's degree, and I was working with people who were often much older than me, and who often said things like, well, you're quite young to be doing what you do. Ring a bell? And, well, you don't look like you've had many problems in your life. And, well, you don't look like you've ever used any type of drugs, so how can you help me? Which led to what I like to call the shame period in my life, where I didn't know all of this. I wasn't working with emotional regulation, and I felt a lot of shame, but I denied it, and I tried to just go forward and just, move on and suck it up, buttercup. Didn't work too well. I started feeling a really low battery, a really low emotional battery. And my feelings were in the shame range. So it started out here, where I was feeling a little uncomfortable. And then didn't do anything about that. I said, no, I'm just going to move on, and it's going to be okay, and I have nothing to... This is the dangerous thing. When we say, I have nothing to complain about. I have it easy in life. That's what I used to say. I don't have, I didn't have all these issues. I'm privileged, so just move on. Then I started feeling, it went up in intensity, and I started feeling embarrassed about my background and about the fact that I didn't have a lot of experience. But still, I didn't come to terms with it, and I didn't talk about it, and I was just, letting it fester. That's what happens when emotions run rampant. Then I started feeling a little mortified when people would say, you're quite young. Immediately I would feel high shame, which made me very ineffective, of course, because to be empathic, you need a sense of agency. You need to feel like you can help people. I was just a ball of emotions at that moment. So I wanted to share that with you because I think it can happen to all of us, where we're in a state of high emotion and we just say, no, it'll pass. It doesn't, not by itself. We have to do something about it. Then, let me tell you a story about this one client who said he had AIDS, he didn't have any contact with his family, and he was coming to see me, but one time he said, Kathryn, I have no reason to go on. But you seem like you want me to go on, so I'll do it for you. It was another difficult moment for me, empathically, because it went against one of my strongly held values, that is, hope. I found out that to be able to have a connection with someone, hope is something that I use. Hope is like a bridge to help me help people. And with this particular person, I didn't have that as an empathic connection. So that was another challenge. So maybe you can think of situations where, for you, there was a value issue in an interaction. And this can be with one of your clients, one of your students, one of the children that you work with, but it can also be with your colleagues, with your bosses, with your employees if you're a manager, with your family members. Do I need to say that all of this works with spouse, children, family? Excuse me, what was that?
It rings a bell.
It rings a bell? Beautiful, beautiful. So hope in that case was the value that made it difficult for me to go on, because I sort of had difficulty finding the connection if the hope wasn't there, at least a little bit of hope. Values are the compass that drives our life. Values are so key to having us go forward. And so I encourage you to think about what are the important values that drive your life. Okay, let's talk about when things get tough. Let's talk about when it's hard to access our empathy. Yeah, you want to go there? Might as well. Let's talk about our emotional triggers. The situations where it's difficult to be empathic because we are triggered, either in our emotions or in our values. And you're going to be doing an exercise. About triggers. Well, a trigger can make us temporarily unable to access our empathic abilities and capacities. It happens. It happens. Why does it happen? Because we're human. Okay, another story. It's called The Waiter. Sounds a little like a Woody Allen movie, but this is happening a week ago. I'm just back from my vacation, and this is let me take you on a trip to Madrid. So we're in Madrid. I'm with my husband and a couple, friends, and everything's going fine. There's the sun. It's just a wonderful vacation. And we go to a restaurant, and we go to an outside terrace. that is nice and sunny and is beautiful, and there's just a table that becomes free, so we go to the table and we sit down, and then the waiter appears. And he says, "What do you want to eat?" In Spanish, of course. My Spanish is very, very basic, so I try to say, well, we need a bit of time to look at the menu. And so he says, yeah, but what do you want to eat? I feel a little bit triggered right now. And so I say, well, leave us the menu and we'll decide. He goes away, he takes our beverage, takes our what we want to drink, and when he comes back, we're looking at the menu, but we're not sure that we want to stay there because we're not sure that we like what the menu proposes. And so he comes back and he brings us our drinks, and then he says, "Okay." And he looks at my friend Denis, and he says, "You look like you like hamburgers. You're gonna have a hamburger." And I'm triggered right now, but I'm trying to breathe and not react. And he looks at my friend Sylvie, and he says, "You paella." And so again, I'm on vacation. I'm not working, which is when the triggers will happen. So I feel really frustrated, but I don't use my tools. And he goes away, and we say, no, we're not ready. And he goes away, and he's speaking loudly now, and he looks really bitter and kind of mad. And so we talk about it, and we say, well, we don't want to stay here. We're not being treated correctly, we're not, and the menu didn't suit us. And so we said, we're going to leave. And my friends look at me, and they say, well, Kathryn, you tell him. You're the Spanish-speaking person, and my Spanish is like very, very basic. But I understand that they might be uncomfortable to face the waiter. So I say, okay, I'm going to tell him. That's fine. And so I say, and I'm not proud of this. I'm not proud. But I'm here to share that sometimes we make mistakes, right? So yes, thank you. So I'm feeling the frustration, and I'm saying I'm going to tell him that we're not staying. And so I take out my best Spanish, and I say, el servicio es malo. I know, don't do it. Don't do it. I give workshops on this. I know. And what happens is I'm triggered, I react, and I trigger him even more, right? And he says, rah, 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 rah. And he starts in Spanish and sees that I don't understand what he's saying, so he switches to English and he says, you have to eat. You have to eat. You can't just drink here. You have to eat. This is how it works, and you can't. Rah, 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 rah. And then it happens. Then I use my tools. A little late, I know. But, eventually I got to it, and I said, Kathryn, you're triggered. You triggered him. You're feeling very frustrated right now. Take a breath. Bring it back to the moment, and try to calm yourself down, and try to repair this. And so what I said is, we're sorry, we're leaving. The menu doesn't suit us. I switched to English, of course, to say this. And I said, could you please not treat the other clients this way? And we left. So I'm more satisfied about the end of the interaction than the middle. But this just goes to show that these triggers, they happen all the time, right? And they will happen again because we're human. So if we break down this interaction, what I should have done earlier is label the emotion right away, that I was frustrated, that I was upset. Then, and this is the thing that I did too late, I should have identified the value that was being threatened, because this was a double threat, right? It was an emotional trigger, but it was also a value-based trigger, where the importance that I place on courtesy and respect was being threatened in this interaction. And then we decide, what's our course of action? In real life interactions, this works well if we can catch ourselves in time before we're into the reaction. Sometimes we want to act, put the boundaries, do something, say something. It's so important that we breathe and calm down, though, before. Sometimes we want to refrain. Sometimes we choose our battles and we say, I'm not going to say anything. Either because what I would say, maybe I would regret, or either because maybe it's not that important. So sometimes we want to refrain, and sometimes we want to delay. Sometimes that's the most empathic way to go. It's to say, right now, I'm too emotionally entrenched, so I'll speak to this person, but in a while. Sometimes that's the most strategic way to go. So again, I was up here with the interaction with the waiter. There will be situations where we feel high emotion and we need the tools. And I found that the emotions grid and the labeling, the name it to tame it, I found that to be so valuable. Another trigger, and this is before you guys do the exercise. Another trigger is when some of my clients used to say, society is to blame for my problems. Oh, I see your eyes. I see I'm not alone. Or, my parents are to blame. Or when people used to complain and to not take ownership or to not see that maybe they had a role in what they were experiencing, that used to be one of my triggers. Do you identify with that? Yes. And so, what's the challenge here? The challenge is, if you don't name where you are in this type of interaction, remember what we said earlier, you'll act on it. And the person might feel that, you're not as open because there's something happening. So again, the labeling of emotions. Let's talk about a surprising empathic skill. This is something I learned when I was preparing for this conference. When you think of empathy, normally we think of being very open and kind and generous and nice and accepting, and that's true. That's true. But there's another skill that we want to practice when you're not feeling nice or when others are not feeling nice. And it is called conscious complaining. So I would like you to think of a situation where it was harder for you to be empathic. Give you a moment. And you'll be practicing conscious complaining with one of your fellow attendees. Here's what we're going to do. Oh, and again, you might say, I don't want to complain. Complaining's bad. Complaining is negative. Complaining is destructive. So I went back to the definition of complaining, and here's a definition: to express grief, pain, or discontent. That's the definition of complaining. And I also went to research constructive complaining, and I found really interesting stuff, is that if you can complain in a limited amount of time, if you can complain in 2 to 3 minutes, it will take the edge off of what you're feeling, and it will help you feel better. Venting, yes, absolutely. So you're going to try this out, please. You feel like it? Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. So here's how it's going to go down. With a partner, for 2 minutes, you are going to talk about something that you find difficult. A situation where it was difficult for you to access your empathy. You can complain about anything except your exercise partner. I know, you have to trace boundaries. I know. Because that's a whole other talk. That's another workshop. Listener, okay, so you're going to do this for 2 minutes. You'll be the one expressing a moment where it was difficult for you to demonstrate empathy, right? And the listener, what I'm going to ask the listener to do is to use the empathy model to observe, to validate the feelings, and to demonstrate that you're being empathic to what the person is displaying. And I love this, the last sentence. As the listener, try to find the chief concern behind the chief complaint. Often when people complain, there's something that they're concerned about. And I think as a listener, it's our job to find that out and to help them put that in words, right? So, and we're going to have a lovely buzz because everybody's going to talk at the same time. So I'm going to leave this so that you can have this guideline for your exercise. And now we're going to say 3, 2, 1, go. All right. Time's up, everyone. I have to stop you. Hello? Wow. What 2 minutes of conscious complaining can do. Again, when you're doing this exercise, and I do suggest that you do this exercise as a form of emotional regulation and of maintaining a mental health to be able to continue. You know, we need to do this. Again, let me reiterate, the key is to focus on a limited duration. Because if you do it for 45 minutes, then it becomes sort of worse, right? In French, we say on s'alimente. What we want to do is we want to take the edge off, but then go into solutions quickly, right? And we do want to focus, when we're doing this, we do want to focus with the grid on emotions that we're experiencing. And when we do that, it really, really helps. I know this because when I worked at le CIUS du Centre-Sud, called Dollard-Cormier at that moment, we had what I like to call the safe room. Sometimes our clients were aggressive. Sometimes our clients had acting outs. Sometimes we were targeted. Sometimes there was violence, and so it was difficult. And we had this room at the back of our offices where we could go to do what you guys just did, where we could cry, laugh, vent, where we could do what we needed to do to get back to a state of balance and to get back to a state of empathy. Because when we're overwhelmed in any way, it's very difficult to be empathic to someone else, right? Because we're in a place where we need to take care of ourselves first and foremost. So I remember going to that room and feeling very, very frustrated and ending up with a colleague laughing, laughing, laughing to get the edge off, and then going back to my office more calm. My question to you, do you have a safe room? Do you have a safe colleague with whom you can do this? Do you have a safe workbook where you can write what's happening? It's called the bathroom. Hey, no judgment. No judgment here. If it works for you, I mean, sometimes it is the bathroom.
Just hang up a sign that says "Do not disturb."
Yeah,
Totally a safe zone.
yeah, exactly. A safe zone, exactly. And we're laughing about this, and it is kind of funny, but it's so important that we do that as helpers. So, so important. I urge you to reflect upon that. Do you have that space, whatever the space is? It doesn't have to be a physical space, but do you have that? I think it's key to lasting in the helping profession. It didn't really look like that, but I just wanted to illustrate it. It was a lot more messy than that. Our time is almost up. I'm going to leave you with maybe one of the most important concepts that I learned in the last years, which is self-compassion, that I lacked cruelly when I was starting out in the profession, in the helping profession. You might have heard about the workings of Kathryn Neff. We talk about self-compassion for helpers. And we talk about self-empathy also. The concepts are quite similar. 3 elements of self-compassion, which is kindness towards ourselves rather than self-judgment. Sometimes we make a mistake and we go to a place of chastising ourselves and not accepting our condition of being human, and we would never do that to anyone that we love. The second element of self-compassion or self-empathy is common humanity versus isolation. This one is also really important, is to notice when you're suffering, when you're in a difficult spot emotionally, that this is a condition that is shared by everyone. Everyone suffers. And it's tremendously helpful when you're in that zone where it's difficult to remind yourself that you are not alone in the suffering. And the third one, as a relay to the workshop that you'll have a little bit later on, is mindfulness versus over-identification. Sometimes we become our emotions. And that often is not helpful with regards to being empathic. This is the reference, Kathryn Neff. Amazing work. And finally, again, going back to tough emotions and to Susan David with emotional agility, when we feel a strong, tough, difficult emotion, she says, don't race for the emotional exits. Show up, be curious, label it, name it to tame it, and show up. What is the emotion telling you? This I find really, really important, the vocabulary that we're using. Sometimes we say, I am frustrated, which means that you become the emotion. Susan David says, change the script, and instead of saying, I am furious, say, I notice that I'm feeling furious. Seems like a little thing, makes a world of difference because it's that space that you're creating between the emotion and yourself. Makes a world of difference. Again, just to make sure you don't forget it. And finally, to say goodbye, I would like to quote Jack Kornfield, who says, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And on that, I would like to say thank you so much and have a wonderful day.